Officers Renner and Rickson carried themselves with unearned confidence, believing their badges placed them above any consequences. For years, they wielded their authority to intimidate and control, targeting those they perceived as defenseless. To them, no one ever fought back. Until her. When they stopped a black woman walking her 2 dogs, they thought they had found another easy target. She looked ordinary, vulnerable, like someone who would comply without question. What they failed to notice was the precision in her movements, the steady focus in her eyes. They didn't know she was a former Navy SEAL, trained for moments far more dangerous than a street encounter. They thought they could overpower her. They thought her silence was submission. They thought her dogs were harmless companions. They were wrong. What happened next shattered their illusion of control and proved that justice could not be silenced. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe. Amara strolled down the cracked sidewalk as dawn painted the sky in shades of gray and orange. Chaos and Mercy, her 2 German shepherds, padded silently at her side. The air was still crisp, untouched by the day's heat, and the neighborhood lay quiet, the only sounds being the distant hum of a lawnmower and the occasional chirp of a bird. A few scattered leaves rustled along the pavement as a gentle breeze passed through. This was her favorite time of day. Before the rush of commuters and the noise of the world fully intruded, there was a peaceful solitude that let her breathe. After years in the military, she had learned to savor these small moments. It was different now. No more endless deployments, no more briefing rooms or combat drills. This suburban life was meant to be a fresh start. The houses lining the street were mostly well kept, but there were pockets of decay here and there, rusted mailboxes, peeling paint, and cracked driveways. She passed a neighbor she didn't know by name, an older white man leaning on his rake. He gave her a quick glance, his lips tightening into a brief, thin smile before he turned away. His reaction was something she had grown used to. Not overt hostility, but not exactly welcoming either. It was the same kind of look she'd gotten at the grocery store, the bank, even the veterinarian's office when she first moved in. A look that said, "What are you doing here?" Chaos sniffed at a nearby bush, his large body taut and alert. Mercy, the smaller of the 2, stayed closer to Amara's leg. Her ears pricked up. Amara adjusted the leash slightly, her mind wandering to when she'd first trained with them. Back then, they were more than pets. They were partners in operations that demanded precision and loyalty. Now, they were her only constant companions in a world that still felt alien after so many years of service. She adjusted her grip on the leash, looking ahead. A patrol car cruised slowly down the opposite side of the street. The sight was familiar enough. She'd seen it before on her walks, but something about it made her straighten just a little. Maybe it was the way the car slowed as it passed, or how the driver's gaze lingered a second longer than necessary. She couldn't tell if it was her or the dogs that had caught his attention, but she felt it. The subtle shift in atmosphere. Amara kept moving, her expression calm. She'd learned long ago not to let the tension show, not to give anyone an excuse to misinterpret her demeanor. Chaos and Mercy, however, seemed more aware. Chaos glanced toward the car, his ears flicking back for a brief moment. Mercy huffed softly, a sound Amara recognized as mild irritation rather than fear. She continued her route, turning the corner where the sidewalk grew more uneven. Memories flickered in her mind. The rigorous days of training, the missions where failure wasn't an option, the moment she decided to leave it all behind. Civilian life had its challenges, but nothing compared to the pressure of knowing a single mistake could mean the difference between life and death. This walk, this simple routine, was her way of staying grounded. Another few blocks passed before she noticed the patrol car again, now parked at the edge of a small strip of grass. 2 officers stepped out, one tall and stocky, the other lean and sharp-faced. They weren't looking her way at first, but as she approached, their attention shifted. The taller officer, with the name Renner stitched onto his uniform, leaned against the car casually. His expression was neutral, but there was something in his eyes, something assessing. "Morning," Renner called out, his tone light, almost pleasant. "Morning," Amara replied, keeping her steps steady and measured. "Nice dogs," he said, gesturing toward Chaos and Mercy. "What breeds are they?" She felt the first note of unease then, but kept her voice steady. "German shepherds. Good guard dogs, I bet." Renner smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. His partner, whose name tag read Rickson, stayed quiet, but watched her closely. "Just pets," Amara said. Renner's smile didn't fade. "Pretty big for just pets." Mercy stiffened at her side, the leash pulling taut. Amara subtly adjusted it again, glancing down at the dog before looking back at the officers. "They're well trained," she said. "Military trained?" Renner asked, his tone still casual, but now laced with curiosity that didn't feel entirely innocent. Amara shrugged. "Something like that." Rickson stepped closer to the car, crossing his arms. "What kind of training are we talking about?" he asked. His voice had an edge now, still conversational but more pointed. "Bet you don't see dogs like these much in these parts." Chaos's ears flattened slightly. Mercy let out another soft huff. Amara felt the shift in them before she felt it in herself. Something was off. The way Renner's hand rested on his belt, the way Rickson's gaze never left her dogs. She had seen this before. Not from police, but from people in the field who thought they had the upper hand. It wasn't about questions or curiosity. It was about control. "We're just out for a walk," Amara said, her tone firm. "Have a good day." She started to move past them, but Renner straightened up, stepping away from the car. His hand hovered near his holster, the friendly pretense slipping just enough for her to see the intent behind his movements. The quiet street suddenly felt too quiet. Amara tightened her grip on the leashes, her heart steady, her mind already running through scenarios as she prepared for whatever came next. Rickson squatted down, hands resting lightly on his knees, his face fixed in what might have passed for a friendly grin, if not for the tension behind it. He whistled sharply, a short, shrill sound meant to get Chaos's attention. "Nice dog," he said, his voice low and coaxing. "Come here, boy. Come here." He extended a hand, palm up, as though offering a treat. Chaos didn't move. His ears twitched, his body stiffened, and his deep, steady gaze locked onto Rickson like a target in his sights. The dog's posture said everything Amara didn't need to voice. Rickson chuckled nervously. "Not very friendly, huh? What's wrong, boy? You scared?" He inched closer, his boots crunching on the sidewalk. "Don't!" Amara warned. She kept her voice calm, even. She didn't yank the leash, didn't shout, but her eyes held on Rickson's face, and there was no mistaking her meaning. Rickson's grin tightened. "What's the big deal? I'm just saying hello." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of jerky he'd been chewing on. "Maybe this'll help. Come on, boy. Come get a little snack." He waved the jerky closer, leaning toward Chaos. Chaos growled, his lips pulling back just enough to show the edges of his teeth. It wasn't a loud snarl, just a low, steady rumble that made the hair on Amara's arms stand up. The big dog's muscles coiled, and his head lowered, his intense focus now fixed solely on Rickson's outstretched hand. "Don't do that," Amara said firmly. Her voice cut through the tension, but Rickson didn't pull back. "What?" he said, his tone both defiant and defensive. "It's just a treat. He's not gonna bite me, is he?" Renner, who had been leaning against the car, straightened and took a step toward them. "Your dog a problem, ma'am?" he asked, his tone casual but edged. His hand drifted toward his belt. "Sounds like he's ready to attack." "He's fine," Amara replied. Her voice was firm, clipped. "Just leave him alone." Mercy, standing closer to her side, let out a sharp bark and shifted her weight forward, matching Chaos's alert stance. Amara felt the leashes tighten against her hands as both dogs adjusted, muscles coiled. She didn't have to look at them to know what they were thinking. They were reading her cues, watching the officer's movements, preparing for whatever might come next. "Better get him under control," Renner said, his smile thinning. "Wouldn't want anyone to get hurt." His hand now rested fully on the butt of his holster. Rickson stood up slowly, stuffing the jerky back into his pocket. "Just saying, if your dog's that aggressive, it's a problem." They're not aggressive, Amara said, her tone still steady. You're provoking them. Provoking? Rickson laughed. It was a brittle, humorless sound. I'm just being friendly. You know, folks like you move into neighborhoods like this and think you can just walk around, make your own rules. Chaos barked sharply, cutting him off. Rickson flinched, stepping back, and his hand went to his own weapon. Amara's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice calm. Back off, she said, her words measured and clear. Just back off. You're scaring them. Rickson ignored her. His hand hovered near his sidearm, and his eyes darted from Chaos to Mercy, then back to her. You need to get these mutts in check. Last thing we need is some attack dogs running loose. They're not running loose, Amara interrupted. She stepped forward slightly, putting herself between the dogs and the officers. They're under control. You need to stand down. Renner shook his head, a slight, mocking smirk on his face. If they're so well trained, why are they growling at us? That's not very under control. They're responding to you, Amara said, her patience thinning. And if you'd just stop. A sharp growl from Chaos cut her off. Rickson jumped back slightly, his hand now fully on his gun. That's it, he snapped, his voice rising. Control your dogs, or I will. Amara raised a hand, trying to defuse the situation. Wait. Just wait. They're not going to, but Rickson was already moving. He reached for his weapon, and Chaos surged forward, straining against the leash. A single gunshot cracked through the air, the sound echoing off the nearby houses. Chaos jerked back, yelping, and Amara felt her grip tighten involuntarily. The bullet had missed, but not by much. Enough! Amara shouted, her voice ringing with authority. She stepped forward again, her own body tense, her hands firm on the leashes. Stop! Right now! Rickson raised his gun again, his hand trembling slightly as Chaos continued to growl, low and steady. Renner's hand was already on his taser, his eyes locked on Amara, but he hadn't fired yet. The tension was a coiled spring, ready to snap. Last warning! Rickson shouted, his voice cracking. Get these damn mutts down, or I'll put them both in the ground. Amara didn't flinch. Lower your weapon, she said firmly. You don't have to do this. Who the hell do you think you are? Rickson snapped. You come out here, parading your little jungle dogs, thinking you can walk around like you own the place? You don't belong here. Her jaw tightened, but she kept her tone steady. I said, lower your weapon. Renner's voice cut through the air, sharp and condescending. You really think you can just bark orders at us? You're outnumbered, sweetheart, and no one's going to back you up. The dogs shifted, their muscles tensing, waiting for her signal. Amara didn't give it. Yet, she took a slow step forward, keeping her hands out, palms visible. You need to step down, she said, her voice cold now. You're out of your league. Oh, we're out of our league. Rickson laughed, but there was no humor in it. Look at you. What? You some kind of wannabe soldier? You think you're tough 'cause you got some scary dogs? Don't do this, Amara said again, her tone cutting through his words like a blade. I'm giving you a chance to walk away. Renner smirked, the taser in his hand clicking faintly as he flipped it on. She thinks she's giving us a chance, he muttered. What a joke. Go ahead, Rickson sneered. Make a move. I dare you. That was all she needed. In one fluid motion, Amara moved forward. Her hand shot out, grabbing Rickson's wrist and twisting it hard, forcing the gun downward. He yelped, his finger pulling the trigger involuntarily, but the shot went into the ground. Before he could recover, Amara slammed her elbow into his temple, dropping him like a sack of bricks. The gun clattered to the sidewalk as Rickson crumpled, clutching his head. Renner reacted instantly, raising the taser. That's it, he shouted. I warned you! Before he could fire, Chaos surged forward, his jaws closing around the taser. The device slipped from Renner's grip as the large dog yanked it away, his growl echoing off the houses. Renner stumbled back, his hand going to his baton instead. Get these damn dogs off me! Renner yelled, swinging the baton wildly. Mercy darted in, snapping at his hand, forcing him to drop the baton. He tried to retreat, but the dogs moved as a unit, Chaos blocking him while Mercy lunged, keeping him off balance. Amara kept her focus, stepping around Rickson's sprawled form to grab the body cam from his vest. Her fingers worked quickly, yanking it free as the chaos unfolded. She glanced up just long enough to see Renner falling back against the patrol car, cursing and flailing at the dogs. He couldn't even get his radio out of his belt before Chaos swiped at it, sending it skittering across the pavement. A neighbor's porch light flicked on. From the corner of her eye, Amara noticed a silhouette at a window. A phone held up. Someone was filming. She didn't stick around. Clutching the body cam, she snapped her fingers twice. Chaos and Mercy retreated instantly, falling in beside her as she turned and sprinted down the street. Behind her, Renner's angry shouts filled the air. "She's running! Get her! Damn it!" But by the time Renner regained his footing and reached for his radio, Amara and the dogs were gone, disappearing into the early morning shadows. Amara moved quickly through the dense woods, her boots crunching against leaves and branches. Chaos trotted slightly ahead, his nose to the ground, while Mercy stayed close to her side. The forest offered cover, the early morning light barely filtering through the thick canopy above. The dogs were quiet, their ears swiveling at the faintest sound. Despite their calm, Amara noticed the slight limp in Mercy's step and the streak of matted fur near Chaos's shoulder. They didn't stop until the undergrowth thinned and a narrow path appeared, one she recognized from months of solitary hikes. The old cabin came into view, hidden behind a line of pines and almost swallowed by the forest. The structure was small, with faded paint and a sagging porch. It hadn't been lived in for years, but the walls were still intact, and it was far enough from any main road to buy her time. Amara pushed the door open, stepping into the musty air inside. She scanned the small space, a single room with a dusty table, an old chair tipped over in the corner, and a cot that might hold together for one night. Chaos and Mercy followed her in, their breaths steady, but their movements slower now. She lowered herself to the floor, pulling her backpack around and rummaging for her first aid kit. As she worked on cleaning Mercy's paw and checking Chaos's shoulder, her mind raced. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, and the reality of the situation hit harder with every passing moment. She had taken down 2 officers, one with her bare hands, the other disarmed by her dogs, and fled. She knew how it looked, knew how it would be spun. She had seen that neighbor's phone. Someone had filmed it, and by now she was sure the footage was being shared, altered, manipulated. The small portable radio in her bag crackled to life as she adjusted the frequency. She twisted the dial, catching snippets of chatter, code numbers, rapid voices, and then a phrase that caught her attention. "Suspect is considered armed and dangerous. Approach with extreme caution." She kept listening, piecing together what she could. They were already labeling her as a rogue operative, a dangerous veteran who had snapped under pressure. The details didn't matter to them. The narrative was set. She could hear it in their clipped tones. Amara Briggs, the Black Ex-SEAL with her vicious attack dogs, had gone on a rampage. Footage from patrol car body cams is unavailable at this time, one voice said, the lie thinly veiled. Incident report states that the suspect initiated the attack. Amara snapped off the radio and leaned back against the wall, her jaw tight. They weren't just covering it up. They were twisting it into something worse. She could feel the weight of her old training pressing down on her. The rules she'd learned, the procedures she'd followed, the chain of command that was supposed to ensure order, it all meant nothing now. She was the enemy in their story. Mercy nuzzled her hand, snapping her out of her thoughts. She gave the dog a quick scratch behind the ears before reaching into her bag again. This time, she pulled out a cheap burner phone. She stared at it for a moment, knowing the call she had to make wouldn't be easy. The number she dialed was one she hadn't called in years. It rang twice before a familiar, weary voice answered. "Hello? It's me," Amara said, keeping her voice low. "Gina, I need your help." Her sister's sharp intake of breath was audible. "Amara? What the hell's going on? Your name's all over the news." "Listen," Amara cut in, her tone firm. "I don't have time to explain everything. I need you to find security cam footage from the houses near where it happened. The police are covering it up, and I need proof." "Proof? Proof of what?" "They're saying you attacked 2 officers." "Just do it," Amara said. "I'll explain later. I need those files. Please, Gina." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Amara could almost hear the wheels turning in her sister's mind. Finally, Gina said, "I'll see what I can do." "But this is risky, Amara. If they're covering it up—" "I know," Amara said, cutting her off. "I know what I'm asking, but you're the only one who can do this." Another pause, then a reluctant, "Okay, I'll call you back when I have something." The line went dead. Amara lowered the phone and leaned her head back against the wall. The cabin was quiet again, save for the sound of the dogs settling down beside her. Chaos let out a heavy sigh and closed his eyes, while Mercy rested her head on Amara's knee. They would only stay here long enough to catch their breath. She knew the trail wouldn't stay cold for long. Detective Lee Darnell sat in her unmarked car. The printed copy of the incident report spread across her lap. Her eyes darted back and forth between the lines of text and the small digital screen of her body cam viewer. The discrepancies were glaring. According to the official report, the body cam footage was unavailable due to technical failure, but the metadata told a different story. The cameras had been recording at the time, and the files weren't corrupted. They had been manually deleted after the incident. Darnell's phone buzzed on the passenger seat, but she ignored it. The pattern was familiar. In her years working internal investigations, she had seen too many cases where inconvenient footage simply vanished. Still, there were details in the report that didn't add up. Statements from the responding officers were riddled with inconsistencies, from the timing of their arrival to their description of the suspect's actions. It was the kind of thing that usually slipped by unnoticed, unless someone took the time to read every word. And that was exactly what Darnell had spent the past hour doing. With a sigh, she grabbed her notepad, jotting down a few more questions for later. Then she folded the report, slid it into her bag, and started the car. She needed to see the scene for herself. The neighborhood was quiet when she arrived. The kind of suburban street that looked picturesque on the surface, but often hid festering tension. Darnell parked down the block and walked slowly toward the spot mentioned in the report. Her plainclothes attire helped her blend in. Just another woman out for a walk. She scanned the area, her eyes falling on the sidewalk where the scuffle had supposedly taken place. The dried bloodstain was still faintly visible, though it had been haphazardly washed away. Nearby, she spotted a small pile of shattered plastic. Kneeling down, she recognized the remnants of a broken phone case. This wasn't mentioned in the report, and it wasn't logged as evidence. The official account stated that the suspect's phone had been confiscated intact. Darnell stood up, dusting off her hands. She turned her attention to the houses nearby, her gaze drifting to a porch light with a security camera above it. If she had been here that morning, she'd have checked that footage immediately. But according to the report, there was no relevant footage from nearby residences. Now, seeing the camera clearly intact, she suspected that wasn't true. Something had been deliberately left out. A few hours later, Darnell sat at her desk, reviewing everything she'd gathered. The removed footage, the missing evidence, the vague language in the reports. All of it painted a picture of a cover-up. The suspect, Amara Briggs, might not be the out-of-control rogue veteran they were making her out to be. Darnell knew better than to jump to conclusions, but the more she dug, the more the official story began to crumble. She pulled up her secure email, drafting a message to a trusted contact who could access archival footage from nearby traffic cameras. If the officers on scene had wiped the local home security feeds, they might have missed the city-owned cameras on the main road leading in. Darnell wasn't taking any chances. Amara Briggs was dangerous. She didn't doubt that. But dangerous didn't always mean guilty. And if Briggs had a reason for her actions, Darnell needed to know what it was before the situation spiraled further. Amara, meanwhile, had made her way to an old friend's workshop, an old storage facility converted into a private armory. Curtis Tech Harland had been her go-to gear expert back in her SEAL days. Retired now, he spent his time building custom equipment and tinkering with experimental gadgets. The workshop smelled of machine oil and solder, the workbenches cluttered with half-assembled drones and modified body armor. Curtis looked up from his latest project as Amara entered, the dogs at her side. "You're making my shop look bad, Briggs," he said with a faint grin. "What the hell happened?" "Long story," Amara said, her tone clipped. "I need a favor." He eyed her carefully, taking in the faint scratches on her hands and the grim set of her jaw. "You don't ask for favors unless it's serious." "It is." Curtis set down his tools and stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "What do you need?" Amara laid out her request: replacement comms equipment, upgraded harnesses for the dogs, and a portable surveillance scanner. Curtis didn't ask why. He simply nodded and started gathering what she needed. Amara watched him work, her mind already racing ahead. If she was going to survive, she needed more than just brute force. She needed eyes, ears, and a way to stay one step ahead. Back in her apartment, Gina stared at her computer screen. She had spent the last 2 hours pulling security cam footage from a couple of nearby houses. The files weren't easy to get, encrypted and stored on a subscription service, but Gina knew her way around digital locks. When she finally played the clips, her stomach twisted. The dogs weren't aggressive, not at first. The footage showed Chaos and Mercy, standing alert, but still, reacting only after one of the officers had leaned in close, making a sudden, sharp movement. Gina watched as Amara tried to de-escalate. She saw the officers step toward her, the dogs growing defensive. It was clear now. The initial aggression hadn't come from the dogs. It had come from the officers. As she sifted through the files, Gina clicked on one more folder Amara had sent. The body cam footage she'd taken from one of the officers. It showed the confrontation in brutal clarity. The audio picked up Amara's calm but firm instructions for the officers to back off, followed by their dismissive, racially charged remarks. The camera caught Rickson's sudden lunge toward the dogs and the ensuing chaos. Gina's jaw tightened as she watched. The raw footage told a different story than the official reports. Amara wasn't the instigator. She saved the files to an external drive, her mind racing. Amara had given her what she needed, proof that something was being covered up. But now Gina realized just how deep this mess went, and just how much danger they both were in. Amara sat in the corner of the small cabin, her back against the wall, and her legs stretched out in front of her. Chaos and Mercy lay close by, their steady breathing the only sound in the otherwise silent room. She'd managed to get them cleaned up and bandaged. Chaos's shoulder was a little stiff, and Mercy had a slight limp. But they were resilient. They always had been. The warmth of the dog's presence was grounding, but her mind remained a storm of thoughts. The fight with Rickson and Renner replayed over and over in her head. She should have seen it coming. She should have known that their stares, their tone, their stance were more than casual intimidation. Her training should have kicked in sooner. Instead, she'd let it escalate, and now she was running from everything she'd tried so hard to leave behind. Guilt pressed down on her, heavy and sharp. Guilt for the chaos her actions had caused, for the trouble she'd brought to Gina by involving her, for the chance that someone innocent might get caught up in the fallout. But that guilt was accompanied by anger. Anger at Renner and Rickson for starting it, at the system that protected them, at the twisted narrative they'd spun. And beneath all that, her survival instincts churned, reminding her that guilt and anger didn't matter if she didn't live through this. If she was caught, if she was silenced, no one would ever know the truth. Chaos stirred and let out a low, contented sigh, his big head resting on his front paws. Mercy shifted closer to Amara's side, nudging her knee gently. The simple presence of the dogs, their quiet loyalty and readiness, pulled her back to the present. She reached out, scratching behind Mercy's ears, and let herself focus on the steady rhythm of their breathing. They didn't judge her. They didn't question her choices. They were here, ready to move, to fight, to protect. Her burner phone buzzed on the floor next to her, pulling her from her thoughts. She picked it up and checked the encrypted message that had just come through. The sender wasn't one she recognized, but the signature at the end was unmistakable. Lee Darnell. The message was brief, carefully worded, but the intent was clear. Darnell was offering help, and she was being cautious. She'd gone through a contact, encrypting her message to ensure no one else could track it. The words carried a quiet urgency. "I can help you," it said. "Let me prove you're not the threat they're making you out to be." Amara stared at the message, her mind racing. She didn't know if she could trust Darnell, but something in the detective's wording gave her pause. There was no condescension, no assumption of guilt. Darnell wanted the truth, not a quick resolution. If Amara had any chance of clearing her name, it might lie in this tentative ally. At that same moment, miles away, Renner leaned back in his office chair, his eyes fixed on the monitor in front of him. His jaw tightened as the footage from Gina's external drive played. It wasn't supposed to exist. He'd seen to it that all evidence had been wiped. But there it was. Clear shots of Rickson provoking the dogs, of Amara trying to de-escalate, of Chaos and Mercy acting defensively rather than aggressively. The footage cut through the official report like a knife. Renner's hand hovered over his desk phone. "She's smarter than I thought," he muttered. Gina had managed to find and piece together fragments he'd assumed were gone. That wasn't just luck. That was skill. His eyes narrowed as he glanced at the logs he'd pulled. He had traced the IP address where the files were backed up, and it led straight to Gina's apartment. He dialed a number, his tone cold. "We've got a lead. I know where her sister is. Let's pay her a visit." Gina's apartment was eerily quiet when Amara dialed her burner phone that afternoon. She had been checking in every few hours, her heart tightening each time Gina didn't pick up. But this time something was different. The line wasn't dead. Instead, she heard faint, muffled sounds, a low static, a scrape of something metallic, and what might have been voices in the background. It wasn't much, but it was enough to send a shiver through her. The phone was still active. Amara quickly pulled up the location tracking software Gina had installed on the burner. Gina had insisted on it when they started working together, in case either of them got in too deep. The signal came into focus on the screen. A point flashing on the map, sitting squarely on the edge of town. Amara recognized the location immediately. It was an old industrial site, a sprawling collection of warehouses and factories that had been abandoned for years. The place had a reputation for drawing all kinds of trouble. Graffiti taggers, scavengers stripping metal, and, apparently, crooked cops who needed a quiet place to keep someone hidden. Amara didn't waste any time. She clipped the phone to her belt, quickly checked Chaos and Mercy's harnesses, and shouldered her bag. The dogs sensed her urgency immediately. Chaos stood at attention, his ears forward and body rigid, while Mercy pressed close to her side, ready to move. "Let's go," Amara said, her voice calm but firm. She couldn't afford to let any panic creep into her tone. The dogs fed off her energy, and right now, she needed them steady. They set off on foot, cutting through the wooded back trails that wound around the neighborhood. Amara kept her pace brisk, moving swiftly but silently. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky, painting the trees in shades of orange and gold. She stuck to the shadows where she could, keeping herself and the dogs out of sight. The fewer people who saw her, the better. The closer she got to the industrial site, the more focused her mind became. Memories of the place surfaced, long ago training exercises that tested her endurance, stealth, and ability to adapt. Back then, she and her team had used the crumbling warehouses to simulate urban warfare scenarios. She knew the layout well, the narrow alleyways between buildings, the rusted chain-link fence surrounding the perimeter, the stacks of pallets that could double as cover. She also knew the weak points, There was a section of fence near the western side that was barely standing, bent at an awkward angle. If she was careful, she could slip through without alerting anyone. As she neared the site, the faint sound of engines idling reached her ears. She slowed her pace and signaled the dogs to stay low. The thick underbrush around the property made it easy to remain hidden as she approached. From her position, she could see a cluster of vehicles parked near one of the main loading docks. 2 unmarked sedans and a patrol car. Amara's eyes narrowed. She'd been expecting something covert, but seeing the patrol car confirmed that these weren't just goons. They were officers. Renner's people. Her fingers tightened around Chaos's leash. She scanned the area, taking in the details. There were no uniforms visible, no one standing guard outside, but she knew better than to assume the place was empty. They'd be inside, waiting. Her mind ran through the possible scenarios. They'd likely have Gina tied up somewhere in the main building, probably in one of the old offices, where they could keep her isolated. The goal wasn't just to rescue her, it was to get in and out before anyone realized what had happened. Amara pulled back into the cover of the trees, crouching low. Chaos and Mercy stayed perfectly still, their breathing slow and quiet. She tapped her portable comms unit, double-checking that everything was in working order. Curtis's gear hadn't let her down yet, and she couldn't afford any malfunctions now. The first step was getting through the fence. Amara crept along the edge of the property until she reached the western side. The fence here was as bad as she remembered, the metal warped and sagging in places. She slipped the bolt cutters from her bag and snipped through the few remaining strands of chain link holding it upright. The metal parted with a soft creak, and she pushed it aside just enough to slide through. The dogs followed, low to the ground and silent as shadows. Inside the fence, the ground was uneven, covered in patches of weeds and scattered debris. Amara moved carefully, her footsteps deliberate. The air was heavy with the smell of rust and oil, and every now and then a faint clang echoed from deeper inside the warehouse complex. It was a sound she recognized: boots on metal walkways. Someone was patrolling inside. Amara found cover behind a stack of wooden pallets, taking a moment to steady herself. The plan was simple: find Gina, neutralize any threats, and get out. But plans rarely stayed simple. She knew things could go wrong. Renner's people might have reinforcements nearby, or Gina might be injured, making a quick escape impossible. Amara shook off the doubt. She couldn't afford to think about failure. She pulled up the burner phone's signal tracker again. The ping was stronger now, the signal steady. Gina's phone hadn't moved in the past hour. That was a good sign. It meant she was still in the same location. Amara tapped the screen, noting the exact building where the signal was coming from. It was one of the smaller warehouses set back from the main loading dock. Fewer entry points, easier to secure, but also harder to sneak into. Chaos let out a soft, low growl, and Amara froze. She glanced around the corner of the pallets and spotted movement near the patrol car. A man in plain clothes was standing by the driver's side door, talking into a radio. He didn't appear armed, but that didn't mean he wasn't carrying. Amara watched him for a moment, her body still as she weighed her options. The longer she stayed out here, the more likely someone was to notice her. She needed to move. With a quiet hand signal, she directed Chaos and Mercy to follow. They stayed close, their movements fluid and precise. Amara worked her way around the side of the building, keeping to the shadows. She could hear the faint hum of a generator somewhere inside, the sound blending with the occasional metallic creak. Every step brought her closer to Gina. Amara pressed herself against the cold, rusted metal wall, her pulse steady and her breathing controlled. Chaos and Mercy crouched at her side, their eyes locked on her as she scanned the dimly lit warehouse. Inside, the faint buzz of a generator mixed with the distant murmur of voices. She caught snippets of conversation, men joking about their next payday, someone grumbling about having to stand watch again. She touched Chaos's head lightly, signaling him to stay put, and crept toward the nearest stack of crates. The crates were old and splintered, piled haphazardly in the center of the room. Beyond them, she could see 3 men clustered near a makeshift table. They were dressed in civilian clothes, but the holsters on their hips and the assault rifles leaning against the table told her everything she needed to know. Renner's hired muscle. Her first objective was to eliminate these sentries quietly. If she could take them out without alerting the others, she'd have a clear path to the office where Gina was likely being held. She crouched lower, moving silently, her boots making no more than a whisper on the concrete floor. The nearest man was standing with his back to her, flipping through a deck of playing cards. Amara slipped behind him, one arm locking around his neck, the other gripping the back of his head. A sharp, controlled twist, and he went limp. She lowered him carefully, setting his body down without a sound. The second man looked up, his brow furrowing when he noticed his friend was gone. "Hey! Where'd—" Amara surged forward before he could finish. She grabbed the man's arm, twisting it behind his back, and slammed his head into the edge of the table. He crumpled with a muffled grunt. The third man reached for his rifle, but chaos moved like a shadow. A low growl was the only warning before the dog lunged, his powerful jaws clamping onto the man's arm. The mercenary yelped, the rifle clattering to the floor. Amara stepped in, her elbow connecting with the side of his head. He went down, and Chaos released his grip, returning to her side immediately. "Good," she whispered, giving Chaos a quick pat. She scanned the room again. No movement. The 3 sentries were down, and she still had the element of surprise. Amara signaled to Mercy, who slipped ahead into the next section of the warehouse. The dog moved with precision, her ears alert, her nose low to the ground. Mercy stopped at the edge of a stack of barrels, her body tense. Amara followed, peeking around the corner. 2 more men stood by a small alcove, their attention focused on a portable monitor showing security camera feeds. She needed to get to that monitor. If she could disable their surveillance, her chances of staying undetected would increase significantly. She pulled out a small, modified flashbang from her belt, one Curtis had given her. It wasn't designed to cause a loud explosion, just a short, blinding flash. She lobbed it toward the alcove, ducking back as the light flared. Both men stumbled, cursing, their hands flying to their eyes. Amara moved quickly, delivering a sharp kick to the first man's knee, sending him sprawling. The second man swung blindly, but she caught his wrist, twisted it, and drove her fist into his jaw. He collapsed onto the concrete. Amara quickly turned to the monitor, yanking the cords free and pocketing the drive attached to it. The cameras were down now, giving her more freedom to move. She motioned to the dogs, who followed as she slipped into a narrow hallway leading toward the office. The air grew colder, and the sound of the generator faded. In its place, she heard muffled voices, someone yelling, followed by the heavy thud of boots. 2 mercenaries rounded the corner ahead of her, their weapons drawn. They spotted her instantly. "There she is!" one of them shouted, raising his rifle. Amara dove behind a stack of metal shelves as bullets tore through the space where she'd just been. Chaos and Mercy split to either side, moving like ghosts in the shadows. Amara reached for her sidearm, peeking out just long enough to fire a single controlled shot. The first mercenary dropped with a cry, clutching his leg. The second mercenary swung his weapon toward her, but Mercy sprang from the shadows, knocking him off balance. He fell backward, his rifle clattering out of reach. Amara closed the distance in seconds, grabbing the man by the collar and slamming him into the wall. His head hit with a sickening thud, and he slid down unconscious. Amara crouched low, pulling both dogs close to her side as she listened. The gunfire would have alerted the rest of the guards. She had to move fast. She quickly checked her weapon, reloaded, and signaled to the dogs. They moved as one, weaving through the maze of crates and machinery toward the next room. The final section of the warehouse was larger, with a high ceiling and dim overhead lights. Amara could see a group of men near the far end, their attention focused on a closed office door. She recognized Gina's phone on a table nearby. The sight of it fueled her determination. But these men were armed and alert, and she'd lost the advantage of surprise. She positioned herself behind a stack of crates, signaling to Chaos and Mercy. They knew what to do. Chaos moved to the left, circling around the room, while Mercy stayed low, waiting for Amara's signal. Amara drew a deep breath, then stepped out into the open. "Hey!" she shouted, her voice ringing through the warehouse. The guards turned, their weapons snapping up. "It's her!" one of them yelled, opening fire. Amara ducked back, the bullets slamming into the crates and sending splinters flying. She returned fire, aiming carefully, taking down one of the guards before ducking behind cover again. Chaos struck from the side, a blur of movement that took down another man before he even knew what hit him. Mercy followed, her teeth sinking into a guard's arm, disarming him as Amara moved in. The fight was chaotic, a blur of gunfire, snarling dogs, and sharp, calculated strikes. Amara moved with precision, each step deliberate, each shot controlled. Chaos and Mercy were her extensions, responding to her hand signals, cutting through the guards like a well-rehearsed team. When the last guard fell, the room went quiet. Amara stood still for a moment, catching her breath. Chaos and Mercy returned to her side, their tongues lolling, their eyes alert. She moved quickly to the office door, pressing her ear against it. She could hear Gina's muffled voice shouting at someone. Without hesitation, Amara stepped back and delivered a sharp kick to the door. The lock gave way, and the door flew open. Amara stormed through the office door, her weapon ready. The room was small, barely more than a storage space, with a metal chair bolted to the floor and a single flickering light above. Gina was tied to the chair, her head down, wrists bound tightly to the armrests. A man stood over her, knife in hand, his knuckles white from the grip. His head snapped up when Amara entered, and without hesitation, he lunged toward her. She stepped back just in time to avoid the knife's arc, letting it slice the air a breath away from her face. Before he could recover, she struck, grabbing his wrist with one hand, twisting it until the blade clattered to the floor. The man swung his free fist at her face, but she ducked low and drove her knee into his side. He grunted, stumbled, and reached for his waistband. Amara wasn't about to let him pull a second weapon. She surged forward, slamming her shoulder into his chest and sending him crashing into the desk. The force knocked over a stack of papers and a cheap radio, but the man was still moving. He grabbed her arm, pulling her off balance, and the two of them slammed into the wall. The impact made Amara see stars for a split second, but her training took over. She drove her elbow into his ribs, heard the satisfying crack of bone, and followed up with a sharp jab to his throat. He gasped, clutching his neck, but he still didn't drop. He grabbed for her again, fingers clawing at her jacket. She brought her boot down hard on his knee, and he collapsed to one side, groaning. Amara reached for the knife on the floor, but the man lashed out, kicking it away before she could grab it. He was scrambling back to his feet, his face twisted with rage, his hand reaching toward the chair's armrest where another blade was taped. Chaos moved first. The big German shepherd leaped at the man, jaws snapping onto his forearm before he could pull the second knife free. The man screamed, flailing, trying to dislodge the dog, but Chaos held firm. His growl was low, primal, a sound that shook the walls. The man swung wildly at the dog's head with his other hand, but Mercy came in from the side, teeth sinking into his calf. He buckled under their combined assault, falling to the floor, and still they didn't let go. Amara crouched beside Gina, using her blade to cut through the bindings. "You okay?" she asked, her voice calm even as the chaos unfolded behind her. Gina's voice was shaky. Yeah. Just get me out of here." The man was still struggling, cursing loudly as Chaos and Mercy kept him pinned. His kicks were slowing, his movements more frantic than calculated now. "Call them off," he shouted, his voice desperate. "They'll kill me." Amara turned to him, her expression cold. "Should have thought about that before you tried to knife me." The man's eyes widened as Chaos growled deeper, his jaws tightening just enough to draw blood. He thrashed, trying to roll away, but the dogs adjusted instantly, keeping him trapped. Amara finished cutting Gina's bonds and helped her to her feet. "You need to walk," she told her. "Can you do that?" Gina nodded, though her legs were shaky. "I can walk. I have the footage. It's all on the drive." Amara gave a single nod, then turned her attention back to the man on the floor. He was still pleading, his voice rising in pitch. "Please, call them off. I'll tell you anything. I swear, I'll—" "Then talk," Amara cut him off sharply. "Who sent you? How many more are out there?" The man was panting now, his face pale. "It's Renner," he spat. "It's all Renner. He wanted her—" He nodded toward Gina, his words rushing out. "He wanted her shut up. Said she was digging too deep. That's all I know. That's all I know." Amara studied him for a long moment. He was trembling, his body starting to go limp under the weight of the dogs. Chaos snarled again, teeth shifting on the man's arm, and Amara saw him wince, his head dropping back against the floor. The fight was gone from him now. She raised her hand, giving Chaos a subtle signal. Slowly, the dog released his grip, stepping back but staying close. Mercy followed a moment later, her teeth leaving the man's leg as she sat beside Chaos, their eyes still locked on him. Amara straightened up, looking down at the man who was now crumpled on the ground, clutching his bleeding arm. "You tell Renner I'm coming," she said quietly, "and he won't see me coming." The man didn't respond, just groaned and curled tighter, his face pressed to the dirty floor. Amara turned to Gina, supporting her weight as they made their way out of the room. Behind her, Chaos and Mercy followed, their ears pricked, ready for whatever came next. Amara helped Gina to a safer spot away from the chaos of the office, setting her down on an overturned crate in a dim corner of the warehouse. The tension in the air felt as heavy as the musty, stale smell of the old building. Gina winced as she rubbed her wrists, her eyes scanning Amara's face. She looked shaken but determined, her resolve as sharp as ever despite the ordeal she'd been through. "You okay?" Amara asked, keeping her voice low. Gina nodded, though her voice was still a bit shaky. "I've been better, but I've also been worse." Amara allowed herself a faint smile at her sister's attempt to stay strong. She crouched down, staying close enough to hear Gina clearly, but still keeping an eye on the office door. She couldn't be sure if more of Renner's men were nearby. "We don't have much time. What did you find?" Gina didn't waste a moment. "After you first told me about what happened, I started looking into the officers involved. At first, I thought it was going to be the usual. Guys with a few complaints swept under the rug, maybe some suspicious gaps in their service records. But Renner was different. The deeper I dug, the more the pieces didn't add up. His credentials, his transfer paperwork, even his date of hire, it all seemed off." Amara frowned. "What do you mean, off?" "His file reads like someone copied it out of a training manual and just dropped it into the system," Gina explained. "Nothing about his record was organic. It was too clean. No reprimands, no minor infractions, just a glowing, picture-perfect career path that looked suspiciously fabricated. So I started pulling at the threads, cross-referencing dates and documents. That's when I found the redacted files. They were buried deep, but they were still there. Renner wasn't a career cop. He was CIA." Amara's eyes narrowed. "CIA? You're sure?" Gina nodded. "Yeah. He wasn't just some agent either. He was attached to a black ops unit, off the books, running operations that weren't exactly sanctioned, at least not in the way they were supposed to be. Whatever he was involved in, it went bad. The files are heavily redacted, but the details I found paint a pretty damning picture. There was a mission a few years back, and something went sideways, big enough that it ended up on the radar of multiple agencies. I think his whole unit was burned. Renner got the axe." "And he ended up here?" Amara asked, her voice tense. "He disappeared for a while," Gina said, "but then I started seeing his trail again, just under a new name. Renner is a fake identity. He created it after the fallout and somehow got himself into law enforcement. My guess is he used contacts from his old life to help him blend in. He created a history that no one would question and started fresh. Amara sat back on her heels, absorbing the information. How does that connect to me? Gina hesitated, her lips tightening as she looked at her sister. That last mission you were on, the one overseas right before you left the military, the one you don't like to talk about. Amara's expression darkened, her voice dropping to a cold, sharp edge. What about it? I think that mission was tied to him, Gina said quietly. I think you were part of the team that exposed whatever it was he was doing. You didn't know at the time. No one on your side did. But the intel you helped recover, it lined up with some of the operations he was running. You blew the lid off something that got him burned. He lost everything. Amara's jaw clenched. She stared past Gina, her mind racing back to those chaotic days. The mission had been a nightmare, a swirling mass of conflicting orders, half-truths, and classified reports. It had left a bad taste in her mouth, but she had never known why. Now, she felt the pieces falling into place, each one landing heavier than the last. You're telling me that I'm the reason he was discharged. Not directly, Gina said. But yeah, your team uncovered his operation, and it brought everything crashing down. He was court-martialed, and after that, he disappeared. He must have blamed you, and now he's using this so-called protocol as an excuse to take revenge. Amara's hands tightened into fists. So this was never about a traffic stop? Never about protecting the neighborhood? No, Gina said. This is personal. It's payback. The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. Amara pushed herself to her feet and began pacing, her mind running through the implications. She had been caught in someone else's vendetta, dragged into a fight she hadn't even known existed. Renner had been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, he wasn't just going after her. He was going after everyone around her. What else did you find? Amara asked, her tone clipped. I got everything I could, Gina said. I downloaded backup copies of all the footage, all the documents, even some of the original mission files. It's not everything, but it's enough to prove what he's done, enough to show who he really is. Amara stopped pacing, turning to face her sister. And the footage. Does it show the truth? Gina nodded. It shows the dogs weren't aggressive. It shows the officers were the ones escalating. If we can get it to someone who can use it, we can blow this whole thing open. Amara clenched her jaw, the weight of the drive in her hand feeling heavier than it should. We'll take it to Darnell, she said. She's been reaching out for a reason. If she's the real deal, she'll know what to do. She's our best bet, Gina agreed. But you have to be careful. Renner's got people everywhere. He's not going to let this slide. I'm counting on it, Amara said. She tucked the drive into a secure pocket and looked at Gina. Stay out of sight. If anything happens to me, get this to Darnell. Don't let him bury it. Gina nodded, her expression serious. What about you? I'm not done yet, Amara said simply. She knelt beside Chaos and Mercy, checking their harnesses and patting them gently. The dogs were calm, steady, as if they knew the gravity of the situation. We've still got work to do. Amara sat across from Detective Lee Darnell at the small table inside the dimly lit safe house. The room was silent except for the faint hum of an old refrigerator. Chaos and Mercy lay on the floor nearby, their eyes steady, ears twitching now and then, as if they too were absorbing every word. Darnell leaned back in her chair, studying Amara carefully. You already know who he really is, she said, her tone low. But let me fill in the gaps. Amara gave a curt nod, her expression neutral. Go on. Darnell flipped open a slim file and tapped one of the grainy photos inside. Renner wasn't always a cop. I don't think he ever actually wanted to be one. He started off as a paramilitary operative, and he was good at it. Maybe too good. His work in the field was clean at first, quiet missions, clean exits. But after a few years, he started cutting corners, taking on jobs that fell outside the lines. arms deals, covert fund transfers, nothing you'd ever see on paper. But everyone knew what he was doing. Amara didn't speak. She let Darnell continue. He got greedy, started using his position to run his own operations under the radar. The problem was, the agency doesn't like loose cannons. They were happy to turn a blind eye until someone higher up took notice. I don't know if he thought he was untouchable, or if he just made the wrong enemy, but someone set their sights on him. Your last mission overseas, that extraction and recovery op, was the nail in his coffin. I've already heard this part, Amara said, her voice quiet but sharp. Gina told me we exposed him without even knowing. Darnell nodded. What she might not have mentioned is how fast things fell apart after that. Once your team's intel came back to the agency, they didn't just burn him. They torched his entire network. They used your report to pull the rug out from under him, left him with no assets, no backup, no escape plan. By the time he realized what was happening, it was too late. His team scattered. The accounts he thought were secure were frozen. And then, like that, she snapped her fingers. He was out. No hearing, no formal reprimand. Just a dishonorable discharge and a swift exit from the world he'd built. Amara's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. I don't think he ever forgave the agency for that. Darnell said, and I sure as hell know he didn't forgive the people who made it possible. Your team. He probably never even learned your names until years later. But once he did, you became a loose end. And he decided to clean up that loose end by joining law enforcement and hiding in plain sight. Amara said, her tone bitter. Typical. Darnell nodded again. It was a smart move. By the time he resurfaced, he'd created a squeaky clean record, pulled some strings to get hired in a department that wouldn't ask questions, and settled in. But all along, he was just biding his time. Until now, Amara muttered. Until now, Darnell confirmed. He's been waiting for the perfect moment, and now he's got connections on the inside, helping him cover his tracks. People who owe him favors. People who don't even know what he's really done. They see him as this stand-up officer. Someone who can get things done, and they don't realize he's playing them. Amara crossed her arms. You're saying the reason this all feels so personal is because it is. He's not just cleaning up old business. He's settling a score. Exactly, Darnell said. And he's been doing it piece by piece. You're not the only one on his list, but you're the one he's fixated on right now. You're the one he blames most. Amara leaned back in her chair, her gaze steady. So, what's next? Darnell slid the file across the table. I've been compiling everything I can find. His financial records, discrepancies in his department transfers, inconsistencies in his reports. Combined with the footage you and Gina pulled, we have enough to make a solid case. Does this get him behind bars? Amara asked bluntly. With the right push, Darnell said. But it's going to take time. Renner's smart. He's covered his tracks well. And even with this evidence, we'll need someone higher up willing to take the risk. But if we keep digging, if we keep applying pressure, we can bring him down. Amara looked at the file, then back at Darnell. You better be right. Because if this falls apart, if he gets away, he won't, Darnell said firmly. Not if we stay on him. Amara's expression didn't soften, but she nodded. Then let's get to work. Amara stood in the safe house kitchen, her hands resting on the edge of the counter as she studied the printed blueprints that Darnell had brought. The detective had managed to get her hands on internal maps of the police headquarters, highlighting access points, surveillance blind spots, and the location of the department's secure server room. The paper spread out in front of her was littered with circles, arrows, and notes in Darnell's tight handwriting, each marking the best route to slip in and out undetected. Gina sat at the small table beside her, laptop open, typing furiously. She was already working on the back end, setting up the tools they'd need to download the files and safely route them to multiple secure storage sites. Her eyes flicked back and forth between the screen and the notes she'd scribbled on a notepad next to her. Chaos and mercy lay at her feet, but even in their relaxed postures, They were alert, their ears twitching at every faint sound in the room. "This route here," Darnell said, leaning over Amara's shoulder, "is the cleanest. The cameras in that corridor are out of sync. They'll sweep right past you if you time it right. The only thing you need to worry about is the patrol officer who passes through every 20 minutes. If you catch him in the stairwell, he won't even see you coming." Amara nodded, her brow furrowed as she traced the path on the map with her finger. "What about the server room itself?" "Single camera at the door," Darnell replied. "No audio feed, just video. It's tied to a separate system, though, so Gina will have to bypass it remotely. Once you're in, there's a master console. That's where we'll plug in Gina's drive. It should take about 15 minutes to copy everything." Amara straightened, her eyes still on the map. 15 minutes is a long time if something goes wrong, which is why we'll be monitoring every step, Gina said, her voice calm but firm. "Once you're in, I'll take over the feed and start the transfer. You just have to keep it steady until the files are out." "And the dogs?" Amara asked, glancing down at Chaos and Mercy. "They're coming in with me." Darnell hesitated. "Amara, it's going to be tight quarters. You're sure they'll be okay in that environment?" Amara's eyes narrowed slightly. "They're trained for this. They'll know how to move, where to stay, and if we run into trouble, I'd rather have them at my side than anyone else." Darnell held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I trust you know what you're doing." The next few days were a blur of preparation. Darnell continued refining the maps, adding notes on patrol schedules and updating escape routes. Gina worked late into the night on her laptop, fine-tuning the encryption tools they'd need to bypass the department's firewalls. Amara spent hours running drills with Chaos and Mercy. They practiced silent takedowns, moving through narrow spaces, and responding to hand signals. Each session was designed to mimic the conditions they'd face in the raid. Dim lighting, confined quarters, and the constant need for absolute silence. By the third night, the team was ready. Darnell spread the final map on the table, pointing to the route they'd settled on. "You'll go in through the east maintenance entrance," she said. "It's locked, but not alarmed. Once you're inside, it's a straight shot to the stairs. That'll bring you down to the basement level, where the server room is located. Gina will be monitoring everything from here. If anything changes, if patrols shift, or a camera comes back online, she'll let you know." Amara nodded. "And once I'm in, you'll have a window," Darnell replied. "No more than 15 minutes to plug in, download the files, and get out. After that, the system's backup cycle will kick in, and they'll notice someone's in the server." 15 minutes, Amara repeated. "Got it." Darnell leaned in, her expression serious. "If anything feels off, you pull back. This isn't a one-shot deal. We can regroup and try again if we have to." Amara shook her head. "No, we finish this now. The longer we wait, the more time he has to cover his tracks." Gina looked up from her laptop. "Amara, I've set up a dead man switch. If something happens, if you can't get out, just hit the button I gave you. It'll trigger an automatic upload of everything we've already gathered. That way, at least the story won't die with us." Amara gave her sister a faint smile. "Thanks, Gina. Let's hope it doesn't come to that." That night, as they loaded the final gear into a plain, unmarked van, Amara crouched beside Chaos and Mercy, giving each of them a quick scratch behind the ears. "You two ready?" she asked softly. Chaos huffed quietly, his tail wagging once. Mercy licked her hand, her eyes bright and steady. They didn't need words. They were ready. Amara stood, slinging her pack over her shoulder. She glanced at Darnell and Gina, who both nodded. The plan was set. The team prepared. All that was left was to execute it. "Let's move," Amara said, and they headed out into the night. Amara crouched in the shadows just beyond the precinct's east entrance, her heart steady and her breathing controlled. The city was silent at this hour, the streets bathed in the faint glow of streetlights. Beside her, Chaos and Mercy stayed low, their bodies pressed to the ground. Their eyes were locked on her, waiting for the signal. She checked her watch. The camera sweep on this side of the building wouldn't pass again for another 2 minutes. The patrol officer making his rounds was exactly where Darnell had said he'd be, on the opposite end of the parking lot. Timing was everything, and the window was narrow. With a soft exhale, Amara reached into her pack and pulled out the small device Gina had rigged. She pressed the button, watching as the maintenance door's lock gave a faint click, disengaging. Slowly, carefully, she pushed it open and slipped inside, the dogs padding silently behind her. The faint hum of the building's fluorescent lights met her ears, but beyond that, the interior was eerily still. Every step was deliberate as she moved down the dim corridors, her boots brushing against the scuffed tile floor. Chaos led slightly, his body low, nose close to the ground, while Mercy stayed at her flank. The dogs didn't make a sound, responding only to her subtle hand gestures. Each turn in the maze-like hallways brought them closer to the server room. Amara knew this place, not intimately, but well enough. Darnell's blueprints and notes had given her the edge she needed. The hallway cameras were spaced out, the patrol routes predictable, yet the stillness around her was unnerving. Every faint hum of machinery or creak of the building's infrastructure sent a whisper of tension down her spine. She couldn't afford mistakes. Not here. When she reached the basement level, her hand hovered near the small device again. The secure evidence room was ahead, its heavy door and access panel waiting. Amara glanced at Chaos, whose ears twitched as if sensing her hesitation. Mercy stayed still, a steady presence at her side. "Not yet," she murmured under her breath, though it was more for herself than the dogs. With one last glance over her shoulder, she activated the bypass. The door lock clicked open, and she eased it inward. The air inside was cool, the temperature controlled to keep the servers running smoothly. The faint glow of monitors cast long shadows across the shelves and locked cabinets lining the room. Amara moved quickly but cautiously. She approached the terminal and pulled Gina's drive from her pocket, plugging it into the main console. The screen flickered to life, the lines of code appearing as the drive began its work. The faint click of keys filled the space as she navigated through the system, starting the transfer. The progress bar appeared at the top of the screen, ticking up slowly. 10%. 15%. She stayed perfectly still, her ears attuned to every creak, every faint sound in the room. She could feel the tension radiating from the dogs. Chaos lay in the corner near the door, his eyes fixed on it. Mercy remained closer, her body low and ready, her gaze occasionally shifting toward the terminal. The seconds crawled by. 20%, 30%. Amara's breathing remained even, though her mind raced. This was the most vulnerable point of the operation. The longer she stayed here, the more likely it was that someone would notice. 34%, 47%. Chaos's ears flicked forward. Amara froze, her hand hovering over the keyboard. The dog's posture changed, still low, but more alert. Mercy let out a faint exhale, a subtle signal that something wasn't right. Amara's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. Then she heard it, footsteps. Not close, but not far enough. They echoed faintly from somewhere above. Amara clenched her jaw, her mind racing. She knew the patrol routes, but these steps weren't where they were supposed to be. Something had shifted. The progress bar ticked up to 50%, then 55%. Chaos stood now, his body stiff, ears sharply pointed. Mercy's muscles coiled, her head turning toward the door. Amara moved quickly, silently stepping toward Chaos and crouching beside him. She raised 2 fingers, her signal for stay. The dog didn't move, but his gaze never left the door. The footsteps grew louder. They were descending, moving toward the basement level. Amara checked the screen again. 60%. The transfer was still in progress. She couldn't pull the drive out now. She had to let it finish. The first faint creak of the hallway door opening made her pulse quicken. Chaos growled low, and Amara pressed a hand to his side, steadying him. The sound of boots on the tile came next. Slow, deliberate. She stayed perfectly still, crouched beside her dogs, her hand near her weapon. Every instinct told her to move, to act. But she held her ground. She needed to know what she was dealing with before making her next move. The footsteps stopped just outside the evidence room door. A flashlight beam swept across the small window, its glow cutting through the darkness inside. Amara stayed hidden behind the shelves, her eyes fixed on that narrow pane of glass. Another creak. The door handle turned slightly, not opening yet, just testing. Then it stopped. Amara's heart pounded in her chest. She glanced at the screen. 68%. The transfer was painfully slow, and she knew it wouldn't be over anytime soon. The door creaked open slightly, and a sliver of light spilled into the darkened evidence room. Amara's pulse quickened, her hand lowering to the signals she'd trained Chaos and Mercy to recognize. The progress bar on the terminal climbed steadily. 78%, then 80%. Almost there. But still not done. She stayed perfectly still as the first officer stepped inside, his flashlight sweeping the room. "Something's not right here," he muttered, his voice low but sharp. A second set of footsteps followed behind him, heavier, more deliberate. The beam of the flashlight caught the reflection of the monitor for a split second, and the officer paused. "Hey, check this out," he called back softly. Amara's fingers brushed over the floor near Chaos's paw. A subtle tap, a signal. Chaos tensed, his muscles coiling, but he didn't move, not yet. Amara waited, timing it perfectly. The officers were still speaking in hushed tones, their light moving closer to the console. The second officer leaned in toward the screen, confusion flickering across his face. "Is that a transfer? That's not supposed to be—" Before he could finish the sentence, Amara moved. She tapped Chaos's side twice, and the dog launched forward. The first officer didn't even have time to shout before Chaos hit him squarely in the chest, teeth bared and growling. He went down hard, the flashlight clattering to the floor and rolling under the shelves. The second officer reacted quickly, drawing his sidearm. But Amara was faster. She lunged from the shadows, grabbing his wrist and twisting it sharply. The gun fell from his hand, and she followed with a sharp elbow to his ribs. He grunted, stumbling back into the evidence racks, but didn't go down. Chaos held the first officer pinned, his growls deep and guttural, while Amara turned her focus to the second. The officer threw a wild punch, but Amara ducked under it. Her training took over, every move precise. She grabbed his outstretched arm and pivoted, slamming him into the edge of the console desk. He let out a pained yell, but before he could recover, she swept his legs out from under him, dropping him hard to the floor. Mercy joined the fray now, moving to back up Chaos. She circled the fallen officer, her teeth bared as he tried to scramble backward. His hand fumbled for the flashlight, but Mercy stepped on his wrist, growling low. The officer froze, his breathing heavy. Amara turned back to the first officer, who was struggling beneath Chaos's weight. "Down!" she barked, her voice sharp. Chaos adjusted, his growls still rumbling, but he eased enough to allow the officer to move his hand away from his belt. Amara stepped in, her knee driving into the man's arm to pin him as she reached for the gun he'd been reaching for. "You don't want to do that," she said coldly, pulling the weapon away. "Trust me." The officer glared up at her, sweat beading on his brow. "You—" "Shut up," Amara cut him off, grabbing his radio and tossing it to the corner of the room. She motioned to Mercy, who growled again, keeping the second officer from trying anything. "You're lucky I'm in a good mood." The fight wasn't elegant, but it was effective. Amara used her training to keep every movement efficient, every strike deliberate. Her focus was absolute, the dogs following her commands without hesitation. As the progress bar climbed higher, 85%, 86%, she knew the worst wasn't over. This was just the start. More footsteps echoed down the hall. The fight had been quick, but not silent. Someone had heard the commotion, and Amara didn't have to guess who. Another flashlight beam swept into the room from the doorway. Chaos growled, but Amara tapped his side again, signaling him to hold. They needed to regroup. The new officer entering the room didn't hesitate. He drew his weapon and shouted, "Freeze! Hands where I can see them!" Amara's pulse raced, but she stayed calm. She slowly raised her hands, keeping her movements measured. Chaos stayed by her side, his growl a low rumble that seemed to fill the room. Mercy moved closer, her posture steady, but her eyes never leaving the officer. "Back away from the console," the officer ordered, his voice steady. Amara met his gaze. "You're making a mistake." "Don't test me," he shot back. "Step away, now." She took a step back, but not far. "You don't know who you're working for. Renner's got you all by the throat and you don't even see it." The officer's expression flickered, just for a moment. Doubt. But it wasn't enough. "On the ground," he ordered, motioning with his weapon. Amara glanced at the terminal. 88%. Still climbing. She couldn't pull the drive now. Not yet. "You think Renner cares about protocol? About what's right? He's using you." "Get on the ground," the officer repeated, his voice rising. Amara didn't move. Chaos's growl grew louder, and Mercy tensed, ready to spring at her command. The officer's finger twitched on the trigger, but he hesitated. It was all Amara needed. With a quick hand signal, Chaos surged forward. The officer fired, but the shot went wide as Chaos hit him squarely, knocking him back into the shelving. Amara darted forward, grabbing the officer's wrist and slamming his hand against the edge of the console. The gun fell, and Mercy was on it in an instant, her jaws closing around it and dragging it out of reach. The officer struggled against Amara's hold, but she used her leverage, twisting his arm behind his back and forcing him to the floor. "I told you," she said coldly. "You don't know who you're working for." The officer's protests were cut off, as Amara delivered a quick strike to his shoulder, making him go limp. Chaos released his grip, backing off and returning to Amara's side. Mercy dropped the weapon a few feet away, her growl fading as she moved to guard the doorway. Amara checked the terminal. 92%. Almost there. But she could hear more voices now, more footsteps. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. Amara barely had time to assess the situation. The officer she'd just taken down was out cold on the floor, but the sound of footsteps was drawing closer. Chaos and Mercy remained poised, their eyes locked on her, awaiting the next signal. The progress bar on the terminal inched higher, 94%, then 95%. The end was in sight, but so was the next wave of trouble. Two officers burst into the room, one shouting orders while the other drew his baton. The first one raised his weapon, and Amara's instincts kicked in. "Chaos! Front!" she commanded. The dog lunged at the armed officer, his jaws closing around the man's forearm before he could aim properly. The officer let out a pained yell, struggling to shake the dog off, but Chaos held firm, growling and twisting to keep him off balance. The second officer didn't hesitate. He came at Amara directly, swinging the baton with force. She sidestepped, the blow narrowly missing her ribs, and countered with a sharp jab to his side. He grunted, stumbling back, but quickly recovered. He swung again, this time catching Amara's shoulder. Pain shot through her arm, but she didn't let it stop her. She closed the distance, ducked low, and drove her elbow into his gut, following it with a quick, upward strike to his chin. The man staggered, blood trickling from his mouth, but he didn't go down. "Mercy! Assist!" Amara barked, her voice sharp. Mercy darted in, her lean frame weaving between the racks as she closed in on the second officer. She leapt at his arm, knocking the baton from his grip. The man tried to grab her, but Amara stepped in, landing a precise kick to the side of his knee. He dropped, crying out as he hit the floor. Mercy backed off, growling, keeping him pinned without making contact. Amara turned back to the first officer just as Chaos released his arm. The man swung wildly, his movements sluggish from pain, but Amara intercepted his attack. She grabbed his wrist, twisted it sharply, and used the momentum to drive him into the console. He hit the edge with a loud thud and crumpled to the ground, clutching his side. Chaos circled back to her, his tail wagging once, his mouth slightly open as if he'd just completed a routine drill. Amara gave him a brief nod of acknowledgement before refocusing on the terminal. 96%. 97%. Stay alert, she called to the dogs. Chaos and Mercy moved into defensive positions near the door, their bodies tense, ears forward. Amara's shoulder throbbed from the baton strike, and she could feel the adrenaline wearing down her focus. But there was no time to stop, no time to rest. They were so close. Voices echoed down the hall again. She heard someone shouting for backup. A cold bead of sweat ran down her temple as she realized the next wave would be better prepared. This wasn't going to end cleanly. 98%. 99%. The next officers didn't wait. They charged in, weapons raised, barking orders. Amara had only seconds to act. Chaos! Left! Mercy! Right! She shouted. Chaos lunged to the left, knocking one officer off his feet before he could fire. Mercy darted to the right, forcing another to stumble back and lose his aim. Amara moved forward, staying low, as the third officer swung at her. She took the hit to her ribs, the force knocking the air out of her lungs. Pain blossomed in her side, but she gritted her teeth and pushed through it. She caught his arm, used his own momentum to twist him around, and slammed him into a shelving unit. The fight was relentless. Amara's military training clashed against their brute force and numbers. She ducked and weaved, her strikes precise and calculated. But the officers weren't going down easily. One managed to grab her by the arm, pulling her into a chokehold. Her vision blurred for a moment as her breathing was cut off. Chaos saw it and reacted instantly, barreling into the man's legs, sending him toppling. Amara hit the floor hard, gasping for air, her shoulder and ribs screaming in pain. Another officer came at her, and Mercy intercepted, snapping at his arm and forcing him back. Amara rolled onto her side, scrambling to her feet, ignoring the burning ache in her body. She delivered a quick punch to his jaw, followed by a sharp elbow to his temple. He dropped to the ground, dazed. Her focus snapped back to the terminal. 100%. The drive's light blinked green, signaling the transfer was complete. Amara's breath hitched in relief, but she didn't hesitate. She yanked the drive free and shoved it into her pocket. The fight wasn't over yet. The remaining officers regrouped at the doorway. They hesitated for a brief moment, likely reassessing after seeing their comrades downed. Amara didn't give them a chance to rally. "Chaos! Mercy! Go!" she shouted, pointing toward the exit. The dogs moved in perfect unison, charging forward with incredible speed. Chaos hit the first officer low, knocking him off balance, while Mercy leapt at the second, forcing him to retreat. Amara followed, her movements sharp and decisive. She struck one officer in the knee, sending him crashing down, and pivoted to slam another into the wall. Her ribs screamed in protest, her body protesting every motion, but she didn't let it stop her. The last officer hesitated, his gun shaking in his hands. Amara locked eyes with him, her voice cold. "Put it down, or you're next." The man froze, his gaze darting between Amara and the dogs. He made his choice, slowly lowering his weapon and backing away. Chaos growled low, just enough to keep him still. Amara straightened, her chest heaving. Blood dripped from her lip, where she'd taken a blow earlier, and her shoulder felt like it was on fire. She didn't bother checking on the downed officers. They weren't getting up anytime soon. Instead, she motioned to the dogs. "Fall in." Chaos and Mercy immediately returned to her side, their ears pricked, their eyes still scanning for any remaining threats. Amara moved to the terminal one last time, confirming the files were sent and the console was cleared. Then she turned, stepping over the unconscious bodies as she headed for the door. The data was secure. They had what they needed. For now, though, she had won. Amara stepped into the dimly lit room, her body aching from the fight. She barely made it 2 steps before Gina and Darnell rushed to meet her. Chaos and Mercy lingered near the doorway, still alert, but their tails wagged slightly at Gina's approach. The air was thick with tension, but Amara's expression was calm as she reached into her jacket pocket. "Here," she said, quietly, pulling out the small USB drive. She placed it in Gina's outstretched hand. "Everything's on there. The footage, the files, everything we need. Gina's fingers closed around the drive. You sure it's all there? I stayed until it finished, Amara replied. Every last piece. Darnell stepped closer, her gaze serious. We'll get this uploaded right away. Once it's out, there's no pulling it back. Amara nodded. That's the point. Within an hour, the data went live. The footage Gina had found, the identity records Darnell had uncovered, and the mission files Amara had unknowingly exposed years ago. All of it was uploaded to secure channels, then sent out to trusted reporters and investigative journalists. It spread faster than any of them expected. Social media exploded with headlines, "Corrupt Officer Exposed," "Hidden CIA Past Comes to Light," "Evidence of Systemic Cover-Up." The footage of the dogs being provoked, the documents showing Renner's fabricated identity, and the financial records tying him to off-the-books operations painted an undeniable picture. Reporters swarmed the precinct. They crowded outside the building, shoving microphones toward officers who looked bewildered and defensive. Inside, an internal review team descended, combing through every file, every record, every shred of paperwork connected to Renner. The department was in chaos. Renner himself didn't go quietly. When the news first broke, he tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, claiming the footage was doctored and the records taken out of context. But his voice carried less weight with every passing hour. The evidence was overwhelming. No matter how hard he tried to control the narrative, it slipped further from his grasp. The final blow came during a live press conference. Renner had managed to secure a podium inside the precinct's main lobby, flanked by a few loyal officers who hadn't yet realized the tide had turned. As he spoke, trying to downplay the mounting accusations, the cameras stayed fixed on him. His words grew more frantic, more defensive, as reporters shouted questions. "Captain Renner," one reporter called out, "how do you explain the footage showing you orchestrating the incident? Why does your personnel file contain multiple falsified entries?" Another demanded. Renner's voice grew tight, his composure cracking. "These accusations are baseless. The department is investigating thoroughly, and I assure you, he never got to finish." From the side of the room, Darnell stepped into view, her badge gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. She walked purposefully toward the podium, her hand resting on her belt. The room fell into a hush, the cameras zooming in on her as she approached. "Captain Renner," she said, her voice steady but firm, "you're under arrest." Renner's face darkened. "What is this?" he barked. "You can't—" Darnell didn't flinch. She raised her voice, speaking directly to the crowd of reporters and officers. "Captain Renner is being taken into custody for falsifying official records, orchestrating a criminal cover-up, and obstructing justice. He will answer for his actions." The reporters erupted, shouting questions and snapping photos. Renner's face turned red, his jaw tight as he tried to protest. But Darnell was already pulling a pair of handcuffs from her belt. "Turn around," she said flatly. He hesitated, his gaze darting around the room as if looking for someone, anyone, to help him, but no one stepped forward. Slowly, reluctantly, he turned. The cameras captured every moment, the cuffs snapping around his wrists, his bitter scowl, the officers who once supported him standing silently to the side. It was a public fall from grace, broadcast live for everyone to see. As Renner was led away, Gina and Amara watched from a quiet corner of the building. Gina had her laptop open, monitoring the flood of responses online. The video of Renner's arrest was already being clipped and shared across every major platform. People were demanding answers, calling for accountability. And for once, the department couldn't brush it aside. "That'll stick," Gina said, closing her laptop with a nod. "He can't spin his way out of that one." Amara folded her arms, watching the screen that displayed the press conference feed. "What about the others?" she asked. "Rickson, the officers who helped him cover this up?" "Rickson's already talking," Darnell said as she joined them. "When we pulled him in for questioning, he cracked. He admitted everything. How Renner manipulated the department, how they falsified the reports, how they tried to frame you. He knows federal charges are coming if he doesn't cooperate, so he's spilling every detail. Amara nodded slowly. So the house of cards is falling. It is, Darnell said. And thanks to you. There's no stopping it now. The three of them stood together, the weight of the past few days settling on their shoulders. It wasn't over. Not completely. But the tide had turned, and the truth was out. A month later, the world outside the courthouse was a swirl of noise and flashing lights. Reporters lined the steps, cameras trained on the grand double doors that led into the public hearing room. Amara approached with Chaos and Mercy at her side, their leashes loosely held in her hands. The dogs, unfazed by the commotion, walked steadily, their tails wagging slightly as the crowd murmured and called out questions. Inside, the hearing chamber was filled with city officials, law enforcement representatives, and members of the press. At the front of the room sat a panel of internal affairs leaders and public integrity commissioners. Amara stood tall before them, her back straight and her face calm. Her ribs had healed, her shoulder no longer ached, and the faint bruises from that night in the evidence room were now just a memory. But the story of that night, and everything that led up to it, was still fresh in everyone's mind. The hearing was brief, formal, and to the point. The panel stated that Amara was officially cleared of any wrongdoing. The evidence provided, including the viral footage of Chaos and Mercy defending her, had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that she had acted in self-defense and in the pursuit of justice. Amara's actions had not only exposed corruption, but had also highlighted the critical need for accountability within the department. Her name was cleared, her record spotless. When the hearing concluded, the crowd outside erupted into a mixture of cheers and rapid-fire questions from the press. Amara stood on the courthouse steps, Chaos and Mercy sitting on either side of her, as she gave a brief statement. "I'm grateful that the truth came to light," she said, her voice steady, carrying easily over the murmurs of the crowd. "My only goal was to ensure that justice was served, and to make sure that no one, citizen or officer, was above the law. I couldn't have done it without the help of my family, my friends, and those who believed in doing what's right." A reporter called out, "What's next for you?" Amara glanced at the dogs, then at the gathered crowd. "A fresh start," she said simply, "and maybe some much-needed rest." Her words carried a weight of finality, but there was also a hint of a smile on her face, a rare, fleeting expression that hinted at hope. Later that evening, Amara sat on a quiet park bench with Gina. Chaos and Mercy played nearby, running through the grass, their tails wagging furiously as they chased each other. The viral footage of their bravery had transformed the public's perception. People who once judged Amara for her military past now saw her as someone who had stood up to corruption. Chaos and Mercy had become minor celebrities in their own right, their courage winning over the hearts of people everywhere. Gina leaned back, watching the dogs. "I still can't believe we made it out of this," she said, her tone a mixture of awe and relief. Amara glanced at her sister. "Neither can I," she admitted. "But you did good, Gina. That drive, the research. You were the key to all of this." Gina looked down at her hands, then back up at Amara. "I know we've had our differences," she said softly, "but I'm proud of you, of everything you've done." Amara didn't respond right away. She let the moment settle, the sounds of the dogs barking in the distance filling the silence. Finally, she turned to Gina. "I'm proud of you, too." It was a simple exchange, but it carried the weight of years of unspoken feelings. The sisters sat together, the tension between them melting away under the glow of the setting sun. A few weeks later, Darnell called Amara to meet at a small cafe near the precinct. It was early morning, the streets still quiet, and Amara arrived with Chaos and Mercy by her side. Darnell was already seated at an outdoor table, sipping a cup of coffee. She looked up as Amara approached, her expression unreadable. Amara took a seat across from her. "What's this about?" she asked. Darnell set her coffee down, folding her hands on the table. "Internal Affairs is making changes," she said. "Big ones. We're restructuring how we identify and deal with corruption. The public fallout from the Renner case made it clear that our old methods weren't enough. We need people who've seen how bad it can get. People who know how to spot the red flags before it's too late. Amara leaned back in her chair, studying Darnell's face. You want me to help you train them? Not just train, Darnell said. Lead. We need someone with your background, your experience. Someone who can teach investigators how to handle these situations without making them worse. Amara let out a slow breath, looking down at the table. I'm not sure I'm the right person for that, she said quietly. You're exactly the right person, Darnell countered. You've been on the other side of it. You know what it's like to have the system fail you, and you know how to fight back. You're the one who brought the truth to light. And, frankly, if you can handle training those dogs of yours to work with the precision they do, you can handle a few IA trainees. Amara allowed herself a faint smile. They are pretty good, aren't they? Darnell chuckled. Damn good. Think about it, Briggs. We could use someone like you. Amara didn't answer right away. She looked out at the street, watching the early morning light spread across the pavement. Chaos and Mercy were lying quietly at her feet, calm and content. The weight of everything she'd been through still lingered, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like there was a path forward. I'll think about it, she said finally. Darnell nodded. That's all I'm asking. Amara had been enjoying a rare moment of peace at her small, unassuming house. The evening was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of rain that had passed through earlier. Chaos and Mercy lay sprawled in their usual spots. Chaos near the back door, Mercy curled at the foot of the couch. The steady rhythm of their breathing was a comforting backdrop as Amara sipped from a cup of tea, her mind far from the events that had upended her life in recent months. But the peace didn't last. Chaos suddenly lifted his head, his ears flicking toward the window. A low rumble vibrated through his chest, not yet a growl but close enough to make Amara lower her cup and set it carefully on the table. Mercy's head shot up next, her eyes snapping to the back door. Her nose twitched, testing the air, and her body shifted into a more alert posture. Amara leaned forward, her movements slow and measured. She trusted her dog's instincts implicitly. They weren't prone to false alarms. Something was outside. The soft hum of the television became background noise as she focused on the dogs. On screen, a news anchor was reporting the aftermath of Renner's high-profile escape. The details were grim. Administrative loopholes, suspiciously timed paperwork, and rumors of well-placed allies who had smoothed his path. It was the kind of story that should have shocked the public. But all Amara could think about now was the faint rustling sound coming from the yard. She stood, moving quietly toward the kitchen. Chaos followed, his growl deepening slightly as his tail stiffened. Mercy stayed close, her eyes darting from the door to the window. Amara reached the counter and placed a hand on the nearest object. A heavy steel flashlight she kept there for power outages. The cool weight of it felt reassuring in her palm. Outside, the motion-activated light flickered on. Amara froze, listening carefully. There was no wind, no trees swaying to trigger it. Her jaw tightened. Chaos let out a single, sharp bark. She snapped her fingers once. Sharp, firm. He stopped barking immediately, but remained on high alert. Amara moved toward the window, keeping her profile low. The yard was empty. At least, it seemed that way. But the rain-soaked ground had a subtle disturbance. Muddy footprints leading toward the side gate. She exhaled through her nose. It wasn't a random animal wandering through. Someone was here. Her training clicked into place. She backed away from the window, making a series of hand signals to the dogs. Chaos moved to one side of the kitchen, taking up a position near the door, while Mercy stationed herself closer to Amara. The quiet inside the house felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. The television continued its broadcast, now playing a clip of Renner in handcuffs before his mysterious disappearance. The reporter's voice filled the room, but Amara's attention was razor-sharp on the sounds outside. Footsteps. Close. Deliberate. She didn't wait. Amara turned off the kitchen light, plunging the house into a dim, shadowed silence. Her grip on the flashlight tightened. The sound of glass breaking cut through the stillness, and Chaos reacted instantly. He barked once, a deep, commanding sound that echoed through the house. Amara pressed herself against the wall, her breathing steady. Her free hand moved in a quick, precise signal to Mercy. The dog shifted closer, ready. "Briggs?" a voice called out from the back door. The tone was low, calm, and cold. "I know you're in there." Amara didn't answer, her lips pressed into a firm line, her eyes narrowing as she listened. Her lips pressed into a firm line, her eyes narrowing as she listened. The dogs stood ready, their bodies taut, their ears swiveling toward the sound. The footsteps came again, this time inside. Chaos let out another growl, louder now, and Mercy's tail rose like a flag. "You really thought you'd seen the last of me, didn't you?" Renner's voice carried through the house. "After everything you put me through, you thought I'd just fade away?" Amara still didn't respond. She was already moving silently, slipping through the kitchen to reposition herself behind the counter. Chaos followed her lead, his growls coming softer now, more controlled. Mercy stayed at the edge of the living room, her body low, her eyes glinting as she fixed her gaze on the approaching figure. The television droned on, a chilling contrast to the tension building in the room. The anchor's voice was matter-of-fact, listing the failures that had led to Renner's escape. Sources within the Justice Department report that a series of administrative errors allowed Captain Renner to avoid transport to federal custody. Renner's silhouette appeared in the dim hallway light. Amara could see his shoulders, broad and tense, as he stepped further into the house. "I warned you, Briggs," he said. "I told you I'd be back." Amara's voice cut through the darkness, calm but laced with steel. "You made your choice, Renner. You lost. Now get out." Renner laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and jagged. "Lost? You think I lost? No, Briggs. I'm still here, still standing, and you're the one who's going to pay." Amara's grip tightened on the flashlight. Chaos and Mercy waited for her command, their focus unbroken. The fight was coming. She could feel it in the air, heavy and electric. Renner was close now, close enough that she could see the anger etched into his face, the unhinged glint in his eyes. He didn't just want revenge, he wanted to prove he was still in control. And Amara was ready. The crash of glass shattered the tense silence. Amara spun toward the sound just as Chaos barked sharply, a deep, commanding noise that echoed through the house. Mercy let out a fierce growl, her body stiffening. Renner stepped through the broken kitchen window, his movements quick, his face twisted with rage. He ditched his usual calm demeanor. Now he looked feral, desperate, his shoulders tense, and his fists clenched. "You couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" Renner growled, his voice low and venomous. "You just had to ruin everything." Chaos lunged first, intercepting Renner as he moved toward Amara. The dog's teeth found their mark, clamping down on Renner's forearm. Renner yelled, slamming his free hand against the counter to steady himself. He flung Chaos aside, but the dog hit the ground and instantly rebounded, circling for another attack. Mercy darted in from the side, her jaws snapping at Renner's legs, forcing him to backpedal into the broken shards of glass. Amara didn't wait for him to recover. She grabbed the heavy flashlight from the counter and struck hard, aiming for his ribs. Renner blocked at the last second, the flashlight glancing off his forearm. He retaliated with a wide swing, catching Amara in the side. The blow knocked the air from her lungs and sent her stumbling, but she kept her grip on the flashlight. Chaos and Mercy pressed the advantage. Chaos leapt again, this time going for Renner's leg, his teeth sinking into the fabric of his pants and pulling him off balance. Renner stumbled, his heel crunching over shards of glass. Mercy snarled, snapping at his hand as he tried to steady himself on the counter. "You think you can just set them on me?" Renner spat, his voice cracking with frustration. He reached for something on the counter, anything he could use as a weapon. But Amara moved in, striking him hard on the wrist. The object, a glass jar, shattered to the floor, scattering fragments across the tile. Chaos lunged again, forcing Renner to stumble back. His movements became more erratic, his anger rising with every failed attempt to gain the upper hand. Amara ducked under a wild punch, driving her shoulder into Renner's chest and slamming him against the fridge. The metal door rattled, and Renner grunted, his hands clawing at her arms. She pivoted, throwing an elbow into his ribs before stepping back to regain her footing. Renner came at her again, swinging wildly. She dodged and countered, each move calculated, her training guiding her every step. Chaos and Mercy kept circling, growling and lunging at just the right moments to keep Renner off balance. When he turned to swing at Amara, Chaos struck low, pulling at his leg again. When he tried to kick Chaos off, Mercy lunged at his other side, snapping at his hand. The dogs moved as a unit, every motion perfectly timed. Renner finally grabbed a jagged piece of glass from the counter and slashed it in Amara's direction. She deflected the blow with the flashlight, the glass clinking off the metal, and drove a knee into his stomach. He doubled over, gasping for air, but he didn't go down. Instead, he swung the shard again, nicking her arm. A hot line of pain flared up her forearm, but she gritted her teeth and pressed forward. "Is this it, Renner?" she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Breaking into my home, fighting in the dark like a cornered animal? What happened to the man who thought he was untouchable?" "Shut up!" Renner roared, his voice ragged. "You have no idea!" Another lunge from Chaos cut him off. The dog's powerful jaws latched onto his arm, forcing him to drop the glass shard. Mercy darted in, snapping at his legs until he stumbled again, crashing into the counter. Amara closed the distance, her movements swift and decisive. She caught Renner's wrist as he swung, twisting it sharply, and slammed him face first into the fridge. "Stay down!" she growled, but Renner refused. He lashed out blindly, catching her with a glancing blow to the jaw. The impact made her stagger, but it only fueled her resolve. She spun, driving an elbow into his side, then followed with a palm strike to his chest. Renner hit the counter again, hard, and Chaos lunged once more, pinning him against the edge. Glass crunched underfoot as Amara stepped forward, standing over Renner as he struggled against Chaos's grip. His breath was ragged, his movements sluggish. She could see the anger in his eyes, the unwillingness to admit defeat, but he was spent. The dogs didn't let up, their growls rumbling through the tense, shadow-filled kitchen. "Give it up, Renner," Amara said, her voice sharp and unwavering. "This ends now." Amara sat quietly in her kitchen, a phone pressed to her ear as she watched Chaos and Mercy rest by her feet. The adrenaline from the fight had faded, leaving a dull ache in her ribs and a thin trickle of blood from the shallow cut on her arm. Renner sat slumped against the counter, barely conscious, his breaths shallow and labored. She spoke firmly to the police dispatcher on the line, explaining everything. She provided her address, her name, and calmly detailed Renner's crimes, how he'd escaped, how he'd broken in, how she'd subdued him without taking his life. When the officers arrived, she handed Renner over without ceremony. There were no words exchanged. They cuffed him and led him out the door, their expressions grim as the weight of his actions finally caught up with him. Amara watched them go, standing at the threshold with Chaos and Mercy sitting alertly at her side. The night air was cool and quiet now, the scent of rain still lingering. Months later, Renner stood before a packed courtroom. The trial had drawn national attention, the evidence against him so overwhelming that even his most loyal allies couldn't protect him. The footage, the documents, and the testimony from people like Amara, Darnell, and Gina painted a clear picture of his guilt. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Renner's face remained impassive, but his shoulders sagged as the weight of the sentence settled over him. The scene played out on live television. Amara watched from her living room, the glow of the screen illuminating the calm, warm space she'd built for herself. Chaos rested his head on her lap, and Mercy lay curled up at her feet. She didn't feel triumph or satisfaction. She felt relief. It was over. Justice had been served. In the months that followed, Amara quietly stepped away from the life she had known. She left behind the conflicts, the violence, and the chaos, choosing instead to focus on something that brought healing. With Chaos and Mercy at her side, she began training therapy dogs for veterans, men and women who had seen too much and carried invisible scars. The work was fulfilling, a way to help others find peace in the same way she had. Her days were simple, her nights even more so. The dogs slept soundly now, their breaths steady and peaceful. The tension that had once defined their lives was gone. Amara found solace in the small routines, the early morning walks, the quiet afternoons spent training new pups, the evenings watching the sun set over the town. The town, however, was not the same. Renner's arrest and conviction had sparked something deeper. People began asking questions about the department, about their leadership, about the culture that had allowed someone like Renner to operate unchecked for so long. Internal reviews turned into public hearings. Officers were held accountable. Policies were rewritten. And at the forefront of this shift was Darnell, now leading a newly formed accountability unit. She worked tirelessly to ensure that no one else would have to go through what Amara had endured. Her team became a beacon of hope for the town, a promise that change was possible. One quiet morning, Amara walked Chaos and Mercy along a familiar street. It was the same route she had taken months ago, back when the world still stared at her with suspicion and judgment. Now, the town was different. People walked past her without a second glance. A shopkeeper nodded in greeting. A neighbor waved from their porch. No stares, no whispers. Just peace. Amara smiled faintly, the dogs trotting happily at her side. She had found her place again, not as a soldier, not as a hero, but as someone who had fought for the truth and now lived quietly, contentedly, in the calm she had earned. The town was healing, so was she. And for the first time in a long time, the future felt open, welcoming, and free. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.